on this week's episode of In the Suite with Tina Powell.
I think today people need financial advice more than ever. So it's not, if you look around, there's always a story out there. Sometimes, like the pandemic, it hits you smack in the face, and other times you have to look a little bit for it, but that can be what makes the profession of journalism actually challenging and interesting.
Hi, this is Tina Powell, host of In the Suite, where I sit down with top women leaders and some of the biggest names in the financial services and the wealth management industry. Together, we'll discover some of their best secrets and top strategies to grow a great business, build a strong brand, and lead teams in the 21st century. I hope you'll enjoy hearing their amazing personal stories of triumph, trepidation, and transformation in hopes of becoming better leaders ourselves. The time for you to lead is now, and you're in the suite. Evan Simonoff, a titan in financial journalism and a name synonymous with financial advisors and the industry at large. Evan is the editor-in-chief of Financial Advisor magazine and the editorial director of Private Wealth magazine. With over 3 decades of experience, Evan's career has spanned some of the most tumultuous and transformative periods in financial history, from the 1987 crash to the coronavirus pandemic, and most recently, the rise of AI. As editor-in-chief of Financial Advisor magazine, Evan's sharp insights and visionary leadership has been an indispensable guide for elite financial advisors, providing the clarity and foresight needed to navigate even the most complex market conditions. In my conversation with Evan Simonoff, he brings his unique perspective to the evolution of financial journalism. He shares captivating stories from his career, invaluable lessons learned from navigating market upheavals, and his predictions for the future of wealth management. But that's not all. We also highlight Invest in Women, FA Mag's groundbreaking annual event. This isn't just another industry conference. It's a forward-thinking movement dedicated to addressing the unique needs of female clients and shaping the future of financial advising. I invite you to join me at the 10th annual Invest in Women's Conference happening April 21st to 23 in 2025 in Boston. Don't miss this opportunity to hear from one of the most influential voices in financial journalism as he shares how to stay agile in an ever-evolving landscape and why anticipating trends is crucial for success in the suite. Wow, Evan Simonoff, take a seat in the suite. Welcome to the show. This is truly an honor. You are our first official guest for 2024 as we kick off another exciting episode here in the suite, another year after a couple of unexpected events. Our listeners are well aware of my health crisis in 2023. So really, truly, it's an honor. Thank you so much for being here.
No, well, thank you very much for having me. It's I've only done a couple of these events in the past, so it's a new experience for me. Good way to start the year.
I'm so thrilled. We're so honored. Evan, the whole podcasting, as a medium is definitely something that's newer in the advisory landscape, but you've had a career now that has spanned over 3 decades. You are a pillar in financial journalism. You are one of the elite. Your insights have guided so many in navigating complex landscapes during a national pandemic, a global recession. One of the things that I'm deeply curious about is how you've always managed to stay at the forefront of financial reporting in such a dynamic and volatile universe.
Well, I guess there are a few things involved. One thing I can tell you, after 3 decades, reminding me. But, just when you start to think things are getting boring and there's, what are we going to write about? Something always seems to come out of the blue. And you no longer have to ask yourself what the story is. That's been that way since I started covering this business in the early 90s. And at the time, we're coming out of a recession and people were pretty gloomy there had been the S&L and their crisis, a housing crisis. And little did you know in that period that within 5 years, the biggest problem would be the internet bubble, which had its own series of issues that came out of that. And the business really flourished. And again, there was no shortage of things to write about. You had a lot of people who were a lot of sudden wealth, some of which lasted, some of which didn't. You had the emergence of the venture capital business. You had the transfer of people today talk about millennials and Gen Z as clients. Back then, we were just starting to see the emergence of baby boomers as clients. It was really the main clients were the World War II generation, which was retired, and the silent generation, which was getting close to retirement. And things really sort of changed. People would say, how do you get to the baby boomers? It's really just a 401k market and their money is locked up. And until they switch jobs, there's not much you can do. I've heard people lately say that about millennials, but I think today people need financial advice more than ever. So it's not, if you look around, there's always a story out there. Sometimes, like the pandemic, it hits you smack in the face, and other times you have to look a little bit for it. But, that can be what makes the profession of journalism actually challenging and interesting.
And why is it that you came to financial journalism in the first place?
I was in the 1980s, I was working at a retail publication and I got approached by a headhunter. And actually, in 1987, and started working on Wall Street 6 weeks before the 1987 crash for a small Wall Street magazine, which turned out, it was kind of scary, but it was pretty challenging too. And you got to see it. I remember thinking, well, I'll probably be out of work in a month or two, but in the meantime, you're going to get to see a lot of history in front of your face. And, the world didn't end. It was actually, I think that was one of the lessons of the 1987 crash, was that the stock market and the economy are two very different animals. And the stock market crashed and took several years to get back, but the economy went rolling along. In fact, so much so that you saw in 1988 a big merger boom when people said these companies aren't going bankrupt. There was a huge wave of mergers and acquisitions in 1988 and early 89. And frankly, then you did see a problem because they did these leverage buyouts, the most famous of which was RJR Nabisco. And eventually they didn't all go bust, but a lot of them certainly ran into trouble. And suddenly it was all being financed by junk bonds. And suddenly the junk bond market, which was insurance companies, mutual funds, and others, were kind of saying, I think we've invested enough money in junk bonds for a while. Let's see what happens to these companies before we risk any more money. And sure enough, in 1989 and 90, you had the Gulf War and the S&L crisis, and there was pretty, I don't know, it was, what did someone describe that recession as? Statistically mild, psychologically awful, which I think was kind of, somewhat
Interesting.
similar to the 2001 recession, but neither of those were nearly as bad as 2008, which that was almost a Great Depression.
Oh, for sure. I was working at a industrial metals company of all things. I was consulting in finance from the years of 2006 to 2010. The wealth management firm where I became a partner and joined full time on January 4th, 2010. They actually hired me at the height of the recession. And I remember people going like, how in the world were you able to even get a job? And it just happened that somebody left one of the communications marketing professionals had actually left during like the worst time of the year, and which was something unheard of. So I remember being at the metals company. We were glued to the ISM index, and my desk all of a sudden, Evan, became, I went from marketing coordinator and director to being in the bill department. We would get calls all the time. The company that I work with eventually went bankrupt. And so they were calling for payment on different marketing programs we were in. We were in Global Spec. We were in Alibaba. We had over $100,000 pay-per-click campaign. I remember the horror show of those years from that lens. I will never forget it.
No, that was a strange year. In fact, I was, thinking, I remember knowing young people who were getting out of college and trying to get jobs, and you felt really awful for them. Or I had friends who were out of work, and it was there people. I mean, our company was doing okay, but we weren't. I guess then by the end of 2010, we actually did hire a couple of people, but it was it was one of those periods from early 2008 to the middle of 2010, even though we were technically out of the recession in 2009, the psychological scars lingered for a long time, and people did not want to spend a lot of money. They didn't want to hire. To think you're in this market today with 3.8% unemployment is, I do remember some people saying 10 years from now, back then in 2010, 10 years from now, there's going to be a shortage of workers. Just look at the demographics. And you did see some of that during the pandemic with the Great Recession. But now a lot of the evidence is that the Great Recession was slightly overhyped. So I don't know how true that is, but it's, like I say, change is the only constant. And as a magazine editor, that's what keeps me motivated and alert, is that you would always have a new environment. I mean, looking at this year, it's, there's going to be, I think more elections than almost any year they say there aren't going to be this many elections in the next 20 years, over 50% of the world or something. And part of that's India. But I often think if we have trouble counting votes, imagine what it's like in India
Oh boy.
with 1.4 billion people. But so there's going to be a lot going on this year. That's for sure. And, the surprises are just likely to keep coming. And, I'm sure you're going to see some of that in the advisor space. I think one of the things you're likely to see in the advisor space is kind of a reckoning for all these mergers. That's going to, we just had a story this week, that half of RIAs who've done merger deals regret the deals. And
I saw that, by the way, and you were spot on for the reasons. That is a fantastic and fabulous article. Make sure that we share it in the notes for this. You hit the nail on the head as someone that my prior wealth management, before I came to agency life, being in wealth management, we poised our firm for acquisition because primarily, Evan, because of the lack of a succession plan and the lack of partners internally. Like we couldn't structure an ESOP, the age of the senior advisor and the junior advisor, there was too much of a delta in between. So bringing in a partner that could afford to buy into the practice was something that wasn't an option for us at this time. And the lead advisor wanted to maximize the dollar value of their practice, which you bring out in that article. But man, what a culture. It's the culture shift and the culture shock that you talk about that's identified in your stats is very real.
Yeah. And that's something that when we do the Invest in Women conference that Michael Kitchis is going to talk about, and he now works for a big aggregator, Buckingham, one of the biggest. And yet I talked with him briefly last week, and he said that, I mean, it's to an advisor who's worked all their lives building a business, probably spent many years where they were basically just funding a startup, even if they were, able to cover their living expenses. And finally, they start making some money and they get a nice offer for the firm. And yet he thinks that they're, based on analysis he's done, that you're not necessarily that much better off. But what you will get is you will be able to, whatever it is you're going to get, say X million, you'll be able to put that aside and put it away. You'll lose control over your business, but you're just about as likely to make as much money over the next 5 years and still have control of your business. Now, who knows? You may be in a position where, you really want to retire, you have an illness, your spouse has something, if you've been through 2000 and 2008 and the pandemic. I know there were a bunch of advisors who lived through the pandemic and sort of said, I've been through 3 of these things in 20 years and I'm 65 years old, and I'd like to be able to relax a little more, and especially when you have something like that, which is more than, it's kind of a existential health threat as opposed to a financial cycle, which history has shown, markets don't crash forever. They tend to display quite a bit of resilience. And so I think most advisors know that, but there is a question of how long you want to do this for. Some people, I think some advisors want to do it forever. But like you're saying, at your firm, really, if you're going to keep the firm going, you need a succession plan. And that's one of the attractions of a bigger firm, is that you can typically, if you have 10 partners, the odds are they're not likely to all be within 5 years from each other. I mean, that's kind of poor planning. I do know, some firms where they have, with 5 or 6 partners, where they've intentionally looked for people who are staggered 5 years apart so that you don't have that, if suddenly you lose your 2 key people, you'll probably have some concern among clients and some internal disruption.
Yeah, if there was anything that I really gained during those years being on the front lines, it was the need not only for a succession strategy, but a multi-generational succession strategy. One that reflected still all of the different age cohorts, to have a Gen X, to have a millennial, to have a baby boomer, all of those different generations appeal to different audiences. And a lot of times, whenever we would have a client meeting, we would purposely map the generation and both the sex of who the people were coming in. And now that we're talking about this intergenerational wealth transfer, I think that, a lot of advisors are open for M&A and open for succession to be able to show that in terms of their talent, but also too on the technology side, right, Evan? Because it became harder and harder as a small lifestyle practice. Although I know that Kitsis has gone into length too about his argument around the profitability of a lifestyle practice versus the profitability of a multi-billion-dollar firm, but still complex technology became complex, and you almost needed like a chief technology officer. And that small lifestyle practice that has less than 10 people, you're lucky if your director of ops can, handle all of that. But just the cybersecurity, technology, increased regulations, like those themes, I think is going to really keep our M&A on a tear within the wealth management industry going into 2024. And now I'm curious what you think about private equity. You wrote about it in your cover story. I think that was the last. I had your editor's note. By the way, I love your magazine. Thank you very much for still sending and believing in the power of a traditional as well as online. I love my financial advisor magazine. You keep me up to date and on my toes, Evan.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you. The thing I have noticed that, I think private equity people do understand this business to the point where, they do, but they have their own issues. They know that they can't treat this like a steel business or even a retail business, that it's really a relationship business. And if they get in the way of the relationship of the advisor and the client, they're going to really screw things up. The advisor's likely to be unhappy. And if they have already paid the advisor a significant chunk of change, the advisor can leave. They may be handcuffed in terms of what they can do. But if they don't have a smooth transition for a generational transition, they're going to have problems. And they really need buy-in to do what they want to do, which is grow the business and earn a significant return. They are going to need to grow the business, and that means keeping the founding generation on board while you develop a younger generation that can go out and get business. And that's somewhat of a challenge because, first of all, they're in a lot of major markets among traditional advisor-client audiences like physicians and business owners and corporate executives. There are a lot more advisors than there were 20, 25 years ago. So the person who you would be your natural audience is a lot more likely to have an advisor than they were. And there are more advisors looking for business. So organic growth is tougher to achieve than if you believe the financial markets have been up about 13% a year since the Great Recession. So some advisors say their biggest client is the stock market because that's really been powering a lot of their growth in revenues and profits. That's a challenge. And there are more and more people retiring. I think we're at the peak of the baby boom, just turned 65. And you're going to have more people who are no longer accumulating assets, but are taking money out of their accounts. So that's going to make it tougher to grow your business. But on the other hand, from all I hear and read and what advisors tell me about subsequent generations, there's a lot of wealth being created there. And contrary to popular perception, you have a lot of folks who are open to advice. Remember 7-8 years ago, everybody was talking about how robo advisors were going to take over the business, and that really has not happened. I mean, the big robo advisors are Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard, which now all have their own human advisors and pretty substantial networks of them, but they don't have enough, and the whole business does not have enough people to service the demand for financial advice. I mean, that's one of the things we were talking about at the start of the conversation, was that back in 2009, you wouldn't have imagined that all these businesses, there's now a shortage of 1 million nurses in the country. There is a shortage of 600,000 or 700,000 cybersecurity professionals. And in this business, I mean, a year ago at the Schwab conference in Denver, is Bernie Clark, who said RIAs are going to need 85,000 new people to continue the growth rate they're on, factoring in that there are quite a few people in their 60s and 70s who will retire. And that, I saw there was a record number of CFPs last year, 7,000, but 7,000 for 5 years gets you to 35,000, not to 85,000. So they're going to need other people. And I suspect there are going to be I don't know. Maybe they'll find a pocket of young people who really decide this is a good business to be in, and they'll get to 85,000. But that's a big hurdle.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was in the first row as Bernie Clark that year in Denver for Schwab Impact, and the weather outside was crazy cold, and it was the first in-person Schwab since the pandemic. So, and it was right at the announcement of the TD merger, and yeah, what's great to see, and I'm part of a FinServe mentorship. Jamie Hopkins and Kellen Brown both run that program. What I can tell you from working with some of the next gen, they are so excited and so passionate about the space. And so many advisors are giving these young professionals unique opportunities. It's so exciting to see. And so I think mentorship is going to continue to be a point of attraction for next gen talent. And it's wonderful to see how, the schools, how curriculum has evolved. So, I think we're seeing with the advent of internet and mass communications, being able to reach certain audiences that, because of the virtue of the environment that we live in. So hopefully that brings more people to the profession.
Hey, sweet insiders, it's Tina here. I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank you for all your support. Your 5-star reviews and the love you've shown us on Instagram has meant the world to me and helps keep In the Suite going strong. If you haven't already, please make sure you're following along on Instagram for exclusive behind-the-scenes content, sneak peeks, and special announcement. Your feedback and energy keeps this community thriving. Thank you again for being such an amazing part of the In the Suite family.
Can you kind of take us back? Because I'm fascinated, again, this whole concept of Evan Simonoff being always ahead of the curve, knowing where the puck is going, exploring current trends, and just the story kind of running into you.
Well, a couple of people had approached us with the idea, and we'd done a couple of conferences. We'd done a retirement conference and a couple of investment conferences, and we thought of doing something different that was more planning oriented. And then we thought that people had mentioned a women's conference, and it just suddenly struck us that all the major life events that people go through, that involve financial planning. Typically, I'm not going to say they exclude men, but they're things like, putting kids through nursery school all the way up through college, to deciding where you're going to retire, to taking care of a sick relative or an elderly parent. All those issues typically, they'll involve both the female and the male, but a lot of them, it is the women and among a couple who a lot of the responsibility will often fall upon who's going to take care of grandma, who's going to pick the kids up from school when there's some event. It's becoming more and more of a team effort, but certainly the burden often falls on the female. That's one of the things that occurred to us. There's the other issue that now everybody's talking about longevity, and women do typically outlive their spouses, so that a lot of these things that you plan for, I've heard if you go to one of these communities where most people say are 95 to 100 years old, it's the number of women is pretty dominant, so that it's, like 2 or 3 to 1. So those are some of the reasons we thought of doing it. And one of the things you noticed when we started doing it was that even though there are not enough women in the business, and that profession is making some progress, among those in the business, there is a sense of community or camaraderie that we didn't really see at that. It's certainly not there to the same degree among male advisors. I mean, just if you go to a session 10 minutes before the session starts, if there were men, they would go in there and go and sit down, go on their iPad or iPhone or whatever, and check in with the office. Whereas, if there were 2 women in the room, they'd probably walk to the table and sit down, just start talking with each other. So that, just gave us a sense of reward, just feeling good that you put on an event and people just seem to naturally click with each other. Some of the panels we're doing, the one that you're on with Antoinette Rodriguez and Carolyn McClanahan on surviving a serious illness. We have another one on the female breadwinner, which is, I can remember when I was, I knew people back in the 80s and 90s, and there'd be a couple, and if she got a really big raise and was suddenly making 30% more, there were some guys who couldn't handle it. It was, in retrospect, it looks pretty ridiculous, because most of the people I was hanging out with are in their 20s or 30s, and what you're making in your 20s or 30s should not determine your sense of self-worth or anything. You're likely to experience lots of changes, but I do know that for some men that was very difficult. I think we've moved past that in most families today, but everybody has to work. It's that is one of the challenges. And when back in the 50s and 60s, that when it was when the male was likely to be the breadwinner in probably 90% of family units, the wife was often able, at least for some period of time, to stop working and raise a family. That's one of the biggest changes, I think, in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I see that with my own kids, Evan, and that my son and my daughter, who are both married, work full time. My daughter and son-in-law have a 5-month-old. My son and daughter-in-law are expecting. And again, I mean, it's a given that everybody's going back to work. And I think that both of the husbands would be elated if, the wife came home and said, okay, I got $100,000 raise. I think they will welcome that with open arms, where, to your point, in my generation, it might have caused marital strife. Now it's just the opposite.
Yeah. So those are some of the things. As I mentioned, we're going to have Mary Beth Franklin. She'll be going over Medicare and Social Security. She's one of the country's leading experts on that. And Michael Kitches is going to look at the business, and I think he's going to, challenge some conventional wisdom on the idea of that you're going to be that much better off selling your business. In the short term, you may be, but that's no guarantee that you are, going to be 5 or 10 years from now. And I think for a lot of folks, that's not what they expect. And, now, if you're at a bigger firm, maybe you will be, but you're also giving up a lot. And I think advisors have dealt with those issues via their clients for a long time. They've often had clients who've been approached to sell their firms, and like any small business owner who started a business, it's really their baby, and so it's tough to let go of. But there are other considerations, and I think a lot of advisors are going to be surprised and intrigued by what he has to say.
And I think they're going to be surprised and intrigued by our panel as well, too. And thank you very much for, mentioning Dr. Carolyn McClanahan and Antoinette Rodriguez, aka A-Rod, who now just posted that she's been cancer-free for 5 years. It's interesting, although the topic is, surviving major illness. One of the many goals of that session is to help advisors actually not only bridge a conversation with their clients, but to see this as an opportunity for better client retention, and even, I would say, even laddering in strategies with the next gen. Because the worst thing in the world you want to do when it comes to major illness, and I'm speaking as a lung cancer survivor, is to ignore it. There's an incredible opportunity to actually, as my friend Maxine would say, is to look the dragon in the eye and go right in. And so we'll be talking about, how to parlay those conversations, as well as other strategies that advisors could use to be very helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be, one of the highlights of the conference. And I think what you say is, the opportunity to use this as a way to build multi-generational relationships, because it can be pretty devastating for the children, and they sometimes don't, they want to help and do things, but they, if you're 15 or even, 23 years old, you probably, maybe you went through something with your 80-year-old grandmother or grandfather, but I mean, it still is very emotional with anybody. And usually, your grandparents if your parents are the people who see all your flaws, your grandparents are the people who see none of your flaws. You're
exactly
a perfect little angel. So that's, it's something. But, when something happens to one of your parents, that's really a rise. I was once at a conference, and they're talking about the bond between grandchildren and grandparents, and someone said they are both united by a common enemy. But it's one of the realities of life, and I guess it's with longevity, it's one of the areas where we're a lot luckier today, where people really get to know their grandparents into adulthood, and possibly even great grandparents. That's
Yeah, my mother's a great grandmother, and then she's fourth generation. We have actually a picture of that, of my granddaughter, my daughter, myself, and my mother, that fourth generation.
Yeah.
And it gives
Oh,
me, yeah, it's incredible. I never had the luxury of that
you're a
with my
pretty young
mother's.
grandmother. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, but that
Thank
is,
God.
yeah,
Thank God it happened to me young.
yeah, that is, I mean, yeah, you'll be able to, run around and do a lot of stuff. I mean, I think it used to be, you know, your grandfather, sort of limped into the place and sat down in a chair and didn't really move. And those are, fortunately, I mean, it is, longevity there are a lot of things that have made life a whole lot better today than 100 years ago. Even though you turn on the news and it's pretty depressing very often. You think about it. I mean, I was once at a conference and someone knows the biggest difference in the last 100 years is when back in 1900 when someone lived to 55 or 60, oh, they lived a good life. And today it's like, this is tragic,
Exactly.
I mean, that really, it does tell you the life we live is moving forward. And I think it's likely to continue, but sometimes it seems like we are really bungling it, but and just like I thought people's reaction during the pandemic was, and I can understand why everybody was stressed out and was pretty unhappy, and it was very psychologically taxing. But I just thought I did find it a little depressing how it became, so politicized so quickly. How people, I mean, you can understand how if you're locked in your house for 3 months, you do become a little testy.
And we lost the ability to go to restaurants. I think like that was the demise of our mental health state. We didn't have the communities and the watering holes and the rituals of, getting together as people, being totally stripped of the social aspects of their lives really revealed, I think, a fundamental need in all of our psychology and mental health, and that is the ability to convene together. What about advisors that have a particular like point of view or story angle or something that they see as a modern theme happening in their practice? Is that something that an advisor should reach out to you or a member of your team directly?
Yeah. You reach out to me or Ray Fosdy or Eric Rasmussen, Chris Robbins. We're all on the masthead, and we're always looking for interesting stories that are out of the box, as well as the technical stories. I mean, I think one of the big stories we're going to see going forward is just in some of I mean, we're talking about longevity, it seems like some of the medical breakthroughs may be accelerated during the pandemic, with mRNA technology and also like these obesity drugs.
Exactly. Wow. That's been right. A lot of advisors have taken a bullish position in a lot of those stocks. Maybe we're
Yeah,
going to see an obesity ETF. What do you think, Evan?
I think there is one.
Oh, wow. Of course there would be one already.
Yeah, yeah, there
Interesting.
already is one. And the other thing is what's likely to happen with Alzheimer's. I mean, that I can remember 10 years ago talking with an actuary and about long-term care policies and some of these, and there are longevity insurance policies where they're basically an annuity that doesn't start paying until you're 80 or 85, depending on how you structure it. And you buy it in your late 50s or 60s. And, if you don't make it to 80 or 85, the insurance company wins. But he was saying that if there are some breakthroughs in cancer and Alzheimer's, this could be a disaster for insurance companies, much like long-term care policies. That really, and it's pretty amazing that really, long-term care policies were really one of the big things that compromised General Electric, which you would think a behemoth like General Electric could withstand that. And while it's very positive for 99% of the world, if your biggest asset is an insurance company or one of these vehicles, that could be something to watch out for. I don't know, you would think that they would factor this in, but those are issues that are a little beyond my pay grade. I'm not an actuary, but you can just sort of look at the numbers and saying if everybody is suddenly sitting around at 100 years old, there are going to be a bunch of problems. Like I mentioned, if there's a shortage of nurses, if we're 1 million nurses short now, what's it going to be like in 20 years?
So I want to make sure that our listeners, again, I'm so grateful getting a copy of having access to both the digital magazine as well as the print magazine. I want to make sure everybody listening right now knows to go to fa-mag.com, fa-mag.com. You've got Frontline News, RA Market Central, CE Central, calendar, webcasts, white papers, lists, and the subscription is complimentary, right, Evan?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Again, if you're a financial professional, get the magazine. It's well produced, and look forward to other articles. And again, knowing where modern themes are. So the best way to get in contact with you, you'd mentioned that your information is on the masthead of the magazine, and, encouraging financial advisors and financial professionals to reach out with stories, with ideas, with points of view, with trends and things that they're seeing, that the editorial team is very much open to those types of stories.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. We're always looking for new ideas. You just gave us a good story that'll be published soon. And there's, one of the things I've found about this community that makes it very rewarding is just that there are so many advisors out there who've lived through so many different experiences that there's always something new and different and exciting.
It is. Is there do you have any recommendations or tips before I ask you the last question? Do you have any recommendations or tips, or their best practices when an advisor or somebody reaches out for those types of stories, information that they should include, a particular subject line, so that they're not wasting your time?
I would say to cut to the chase pretty quickly as to why this is compelling, why your idea would resonate with a lot of different people in the advisor community, and why it's important. And, particularly if you think it's going to be, headed to where, if you're presenting a story that'll help advisors know or see where the puck is headed, to use your phrase or everybody's favorite phrase, that really captures the attention of editors.
Okay. And is it okay, Evan, if I give out your email right now on this broadcast?
Yeah, it's Evan at or E Simonoff, either one, at that's dash FA-mag.com.
So, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, Evan, you are our first guest for 2024 season. But to wrap up the conversation, we're asking this of our guests: if you could share a personal health or wellness tip that has particularly benefited you.
I was is that I do a lot of walking. I was born with a dislocated hip and turned out to be in many ways a big advantage. From the age of 6 months to 18 months, I was in a leg brace. And my parents always said when they took the leg brace off, it was a nightmare. They could never find me. I was always, just running off. I was a fast little kid. And, one of the, I probably had, the way it wasn't diagnosed in those days, which is probably also a good thing, but I probably also, if I didn't have ADD, I certainly didn't have the world's longest attention span. And so I was always, going off and taking long walks to, when class was over, I would bolt. And when I first started working in an office, I would, after about an hour and a half, I would have to get up and go for a 15-minute walk. And so I wasn't doing this, because I thought it was healthy. It's just because I was kind of high energy and restless. And, I still try to walk 2-3 miles a day and probably end up doing more than that. And so I would say, think of both my father and grandfather lived to their mid-90s, and they both did, a lot of walking. So that's what I would say is, in fact, when we get off this call, I'm going to go walk for probably my 3rd or 4th mile today. But that would be my piece of advice. I'm sure you could get better advice from a health professional.
Oh, no, this is great. This is the kind of organic, homegrown advice that we need. It's wonderful to hear the health strategies of everyone that I know. And I think you've inspired me to take a quick walk in my little cul-de-sac here before I get on the Peloton. You've inspired me, Evan Simonoff. I want to thank you so much for the graciousness and generosity of today's conversation, making yourself available. And again, I'm thrilled and honored to be a part of the 9th annual Invest in Women, and cannot wait to participate, as well as hear from other speakers and meet everyone there. So thank you again.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you, and I'm really looking forward to your session.
Thank you.
You're listening to In the Suite, the podcast that brings you inspiring stories of women leading the way in financial services and wealth management, along with the men who champion and empower them. Our producers are Tina Powell and Kevin Hirshhorn. Our editor-at-large is Kevin Hirshhorn. Our content writer is Tina Powell. This podcast is sponsored by Intentionally, a growth design consultancy working with fintech and finserv companies to turbocharge their marketing efforts. If you want more information, please email me at tina@growintentionally.com. And please also connect with me on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me that you guys keep listening, be part of this community. We've got listeners in 74 countries, 1,615 cities worldwide. Please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. It would mean the world and help us to be found by more people. Please, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn and hope you'll follow In the Suite Pod on Instagram. Thank you again for listening and subscribing.